diagnostics, that diagnostic function that's introduced along the way, or even when I say this entire type of leadership diagram is a matter of diagnostics. What do we mean by that? Somebody explain that to me.
We try to use it to diagnose where our Timothys are to best discern how we can serve our Timothys. What do they need?
Okay. How do you do that?
While knowing whether that not they need to move on to another level,
Right.
or work the field that they're in.
Right? Okay, okay. So discerning the timing even of their progression through steps, or not just the fields but even functions along the way?
Yeah.
Good, okay.
So we have a list of competencies that we want to make sure that our Timothys can do at each level.
Mm-hmm.
And we observe that, so we model.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay, so I heard competencies are able to do at each level, and then you're modeling, you're model assisting, watching, and leaving for every step along the way. It is really, in a sense, a picture of a discipleship chain as well. You don't actually take any step of your own without a chain coming along behind you. When a church planter who wants to reproduce churches needs to reproduce church planters.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so in that sense, the knowing, the competency, the knowing and the doing are there. Is being, that's been a theme all week, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. Is being not the issue, is that not connected to sustainability? We've said it different ways, because you're exactly right, the knowing and the doing. And as they are learning and as they are practicing the things that are, as Paul told Timothy, command and teach these things. Key result of teaching, key result of a command, doing, right? So that being is transformed. That's the right critical path. That said, to sustain any one of these, I've known how to sow the gospel from the time I took the survival kit, my childhood, but there weren't always times when I was sowing, right? So that being, that idea of being really is connected to sustainability. That's why it matters so much that in each setting, identity. So that priesthood, pastor, elder, overseer, or apostolic band, or fill in the blank of identity matters along the way. Diagnostics, right? So the way, there's always new ways to lay this out. In the manual, we talk about those competencies, the issues of knowing, being, and doing at each level to sustain. But it's actually also illustrated in the manual the same way through the barriers. Because whatever barriers really are the next set of competencies, right? You see that. So taking time in your network with your disciples, not just to cut and paste these things, but to wrestle with them. What are the skills and competencies of a seed sower? How do we get over the hump of doing or not doing to being that priesthood? Right? What's the percentage, by the way? If we want, what percentage, this vast multitude, if you will, of church members or pre-existing believers on this side of the graph, what percentage would we like to see doing seed sowing?
100%.
What's the actual scriptural expectation?
100%.
Okay? So the goal right there is that every believer would have seed in their hand. And know what to do with it, right? Church planter? Is it 100%? Reality probably tells us we're looking at a percentage. Is everyone that, or is it wrong that some who move forward to into a church plant land and end up finding their gifting, their skill as a pastor as opposed to a church planting multiplier? Is it okay that there's a percentage who stay here, and can they be faithful and hear well done in this category?
Yes.
In which case, over here, we've again got a percentage, right, who will move forward. And guess what? A percentage over here some of these things that are barriers, it's not just a matter of solving all these barriers and then they will become. Maybe just an intuitive piece of diagnostics is there that God wired people differently. So a percentage and, Lord willing, a percentage. So by the time we're seeing that percentage of a percentage, we recognize that we all have Paul as an example, but not all believers are going to be Paul. How do we then graciously steward an expectation in the midst of training for this type of advance? It's part of our stewardship as well, right? This is so beautiful, I hate to erase. What do you think? Good job, brother.
Your wife did it.
It's your wife's handwriting.
Yeah.
Let's not forget.
Right.
Just
Flip it over.
let's take pictures first.
Oh, there's a lot on the back too. Okay.
Say cheese.
Anybody else? Would you like to model up here? Would you like to come up?
Yeah, model it. For them.
Dynamite. It's our work.
You could draw it.
Yeah. It's a really interesting study. As you were thinking, I've never laid it out exactly like this. Great. Every time it's taught differently. Praise God. The idea of the various passages giving examples and self-discovery. Just for that matter, thinking about in the second journey today, Timothy. Right? So when Paul comes back, 16:1, he is of good reputation among the believers in Iconium and Lystra. So somehow already itinerating to some degree, but do we see examples of Timothy as a seed sower? Actually, less so. He's definitely involved in evangelism there along the way with Paul, but we definitely see him. We saw him in 1 Thessalonians 1 or 2 going back and seeing about putting in order, or for that matter, 1 Timothy 3. Elders appointed in all, right? Or those who aspire. You see that? There's some function there. I could suggest, let's see, a 2 Timothy 2:2. Trust reliable men. Or for that matter, even sending back to Thessalonica. Let's see, 1 Corinthians 4:17. Timothy, I'll send to you, will remind you what I teach everywhere in every church. It wasn't all his fruit, but he's taken on a training role along the way. It's interesting, but we do also want to be careful not to force all the biblical accounts into our boxes and categories too, right? Yeah. Okay. And what's the problem? All the authority and responsibility for this level 2 activity was pointed at those 20 guys. And so genuinely, to shift here, to get to reproduction or generations simply wasn't possible until what happened? What's the distinction between level 2 and 3? That release of authority until they started pushing authority out, ordinances and other things, there in that reset button of the kingdom, if you will, field 4, so that this could happen. So that, for that matter, this could happen. So moving to for a release of authority allowed them to release churches at times, which freed up the church planter to go out and do again, but it also freed up that next generation vested with full authority to go out and reproduce generation. Authority matters. How many times we said it, authority and responsibility are like fertilizer. What are they like? Manure. What are they like in Assamese? It's a bad word I'm not going to repeat. So, they're releasing all these. They realize these are folks who give it away. And what was the case? Why don't you come and train us? Started happening. Meanwhile, some of the same organizations and denominations that rejected Jeff and I were opening their doors to trainers from Fox, Missing, Chuckma, and others. In which case, hey, why don't you change job description? And moved over. Now, by the time he's crossed this line of multiplication, so that they've got streams of church planting that are going generational. After 4 years, we first engaged there in 2006, right? He's down to 5 we call master trainers. guys who could go other networks, other organizations, other entities and train them on all the lessons they'd learned themselves. Meanwhile, to go from 30 to 5, these 5 were doing obviously exponentially more than the original 30. Basically on the same budget. You see that? That much more percentage being used for training and mobilizing, giving it away as opposed to doing it themselves. So we learned this lesson. Anything you want to add in that story? Things I'm missing?
Were all 5 of those in the 30 originally?
Originally, well, one of them came in from outside named Moi. He actually brought in a guy who was a Bible school graduate, and there was a couple factions in between, whether or not he'd earned his stripes all the way back here. Does he really have the integrity to be teaching? And so there were some challenges along the way, but if you will, field 1 and 2 function, sustainability, field 1 through 4, if you will, because they're still doing this to model, but they're pulling along. Then it was really just in a sense, it was adding leadership multiplication as they push forward. You see that? If you will, the training package that comes along, helping people diagnose and move forward all along the way. Finding out and determining who to spend our time with. I told you in this case, but in our case it was 2006 to about 2010, we had master trainers, so to speak, identified. About 4 years. And what was Jeff's instruction all along? Train broadly, but commit to the few, right? So we recognized this certain bell curve for our time. As we approach people for training, how much time did we give them? A day, 2 days, 3 touches maybe? For competence, confidence, and seed sowing. And if they were faithful to do, what did they get? More time. More time. Up to, in fact, might have even been maxing out about 60 to 90 days a year. LEPOC even more than that, where many of these guys living with them, like family. That happened in Haiti?
Yes, sir.
At some point, it's in a sense maxing out in that training or in that time investment, just like Jesus with the 12, if you will. But there's also that backside of time where the fact is getting out of their way. For that matter, commissioning them to go and do more. For that matter, exhausting the lessons you have to offer as they exceed you in what they're up to, by far. There's also that backside of a bell curve where eventually even Jeff leaves us behind. Thanks a lot. You see it? How much of a life is spent over 4 years? That's a year of daily, intense discipleship, isn't it? Life on life type of activity. You know what we've learned over the years? And this is nothing new, no rocket science here for you, I hope. It's all pretty obvious as that goes in a bell curve. But we realize, for that matter, organizationally, and here's what I do want to offer you today. This bell curve doesn't just represent time. I'm going to jump categories and say this also represents, this is missions, SC training, as deep as I can give it, okay? This also represents financial investment. Because people don't typically release what they're paid to do, right? Think this through with me. If we're approaching that body of Christ for the sake of seed sowing, are we going to pay evangelists? Is evangelism, is seed sowing a spiritual discipline? We said it was 100%, right? Is it a spiritual discipline? What do you think? Whether it's a gifting or discipline, right? The priesthood, is that part of the expectation? I'd say yes. Have you ever been paid to pray? Or to read your Bible? Now, the worker's worth his wages. That's a scriptural truth, isn't it? So don't let me step on it too hard. Where does it apply? But I don't personally want to give my spiritual disciplines to a paycheck. I hope that the truth will always be, and I think I can prove it through certain seasons of my life when I was quite hungry But we were still doing up to this activity. Now, how do we get them? If you will, we may provide that lunch at a training. We may provide those snacks, or we may rent that venue. We may provide a little training budget to come to a training. But honestly, we're not going to pay salaries down here on this side of the graph. Why? We'll pay for addition? That's how it was described earlier, right? And yet, interestingly, most Great Commission organizations out there, their salaries are on this side of the graph. And don't use that to beat my dad up, who's to this day is a planter pastor. Don't do it. You know, if you ruin my Christmas, I'm coming to ruin yours. Okay? Maybe I'll get you by New Year's. I should have said that. It takes me, it's a pretty good commute. Where was I? Yeah. Most organizations are paying on the addition side, and when people don't typically release what they're paid to do, then even their salaries, that conversation about dependence where it does involve dollars, a lot of the way you use your finance can stick you in addition.
Yeah.
You can be married to addition, depending on your model. That's why, by the way, one of the healthiest aspects of this group, not just that we are avoiding the planter to pastor model, though a lot of you are shepherding in different locations, but that in fact, this idea of being paid for addition, you've avoided that trap thus far. You heard how I said it, right?
One of the things that I think is really unique about us, and don't get the big head, but we're an all volunteer army. A lot of you are paying big bucks to go train somebody else. I think that honors our Lord. When people sense your commitment to the kingdom, because you're spilling yourself in the effort, and it costs you to do this, that sends such a strong message to the body of Christ. And so I really just want to take a second and thank you for being so sacrificial. You guys are doing a great job in this area.
And I like that. I see it illustrated as well from far outside of what's going on, particularly in the U.S., this MPL US model, that they're not charging people to come to a training. Now, mind you, paying for the food ahead of an internal training like this is one thing. But not charging folks outside, it's not a normative expectation across the network, but it has become the basic DNA. And I like that about you guys. It needs to be protected and guarded because you're becoming known as those who give it away.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. You want to fill your calendar up quickly? Just give it away, give it away. Influence grows, and the word of mouth out there is what fills up your calendar. You want to empty your calendar? Copyright it. Charge for it.
Not only people are not charging, they're paying their own way.
That's
to
right.
go.
And they're giving up days of work, whether they're
That's right.
policemen or otherwise, to make it to a training or to serve the others for the body.
Can I just say one thing about the 60 to 90 days? The common, when we think about fields, go L1 to L2, maybe up to L3, common language, common tools, common processes will go a long way. And that's where your 60 to 90 days are, is building that common language, common tools, common processes. But when you start getting over here, now you're into problem solving. But if you got common language, common tools, common processes, it's much easier to coach at a distance and to coach somebody. But your increase of that time of those 60 to 90 day people, it's got to increase. And I think it probably takes a lot longer as you go up here for the problem solving, because you're learning to solve different sets of problems. Wow. This gets you on the tracks, gets you running. But there's no wind up, boom movement. You know, and I think what happens, and I think it's one of the things I was reflecting on, we were talking about last night in the basement, that I'm seeing a characteristic of like y'all. I've never seen a group of people that fasts and prays as much in the U.S. context. And I think that's direct, one, the desperateness to solve the problems draws you back to fasting and prayer. The other thing that goes hand in hand in that is dependency on the Word. Over here is dependency upon tools and methods, common language, common tools, common processes. But what gets to sustain movement is biblical principles. Methods will fade away. 4 fields will fade away, T for T will fade away, all those things, but those biblical principles at the root of this will never fade away. So your time investment over here with this person of training them to be a coach, it may take more time, but getting them rooted in biblical principles
Wow,
is really important.
that's what I'd say. Keep going.
The other piece I just sort of added to this, so fasting, prayer, dependency on the Word, and then I just think a result of that is, man, more people are hearing the gospel in the U.S. day in and day out right now, which is exciting. But I think what's cool as you think through this, you can't separate character and integrity out of this either. Man, God just sort of keeps taking you to deeper waters through this. And you may, I don't know how you are, I seem to revisit all my old sins and, battle and struggle. And, but it's like God just keeps taking you deeper in that growth of character and integrity. I mean, I'm not claiming that you get over here and you're glorified by any means. If anything, I think you're really more like Paul going, I am chief of sinners. Where over here, maybe you're a disciple of Christ, but you get over this side and you're just like, how in the world did anything out of, we worked with, but at the same time, the character and integrity grew at an incredible, but that's an incredible experience to be forged through.
So maybe, like, as you said, diagnostic function or that intuitive piece does stretch the line over this way much more. I agree. And especially where I draw it here, it's about character.
Yeah.
And we know for a fact, man, I can get skills pushed out the door pretty quick. But by the time we're talking about sustainability and shepherding, or for that matter, redefining success, the matter of dealing with pride in order to give it away, a lot of that has to do with looking under the hood of character. That's why 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 are over here in these categories. Right? And you better believe it's more time intensive than just that public training set. Right? So finding those people and be willing to move forward with them, you're going to spend a lot more time, Lord willing, as you progress along that with a few. So many things to say.
I guess the other thing I'd say is people will self-filter out.
Yeah.
Yep.
We want to hold on to people. Now I still go on vacation with him, love him, go hiking in the mountains. But man, this guy could be right here, and you see the potential, but he's self-selected out. And I can't, somewhere in there I got to choose to take him off of that list. And that was hard because he was very, very close friend for me personally.
So in a sense, best practices there, this is why we can streamline a 411 training can happen pretty quick. Onloading skills, but those best principles very highly intensive time, okay? Now, I don't know how we're doing on time, but here's what I'd like to do. You know what we got on the back end of this when we were seeing training? In a sense, our job, just like the diagnostic for an organization out of the 4 fields, where we saw seed sowing hot, where were we spending our time as a coach? That's that diagnostic function really is the same as we're challenging, modeling, pulling people in here and then on down the road, right? Always modeling those skills a step or two ahead. So in that sense, it really always was for us as well, just-in-time learning, just-in-time faith to release. And isn't it right there in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and 3? He really does concern himself. You're going to read it tonight, right? As your homework.
Absolutely.
Yep. He really does concern himself that they labored in vain. But what's he here? No, you not just are you seed sowing, ringing out all over, but your faith, hope, and love. Now watch for those elders who will emerge. 1 Thess 5:12, is it? Those who labor well among you. He's always one step ahead. And it's happening in Paul's life too as he goes. I believe that. Now, then on this backside, that also a finance piece, but here's the truth then. If this bell curve equals finance, what exactly were we paying for? How were we using our budget? Great question, I hope. Not just travel, But you can imagine even that resourcing that was there, a lack of resource was there, and the barriers, it really was one of those steps forward somewhere here. So that we recognize somewhere back here, along the way, if they're going up and down their stream to diagnose and do the church mapping and other tools that we've introduced here for diagnostics, there's a need to be mobile. In which case, some issues of travel. Or for that matter, bringing a church network together over time. There's times when we used our training budget to provide for travel, for a venue, for people to stay and for training. For the trainer to begin to move up and down his own stream. Ultimately, by the time they were looking and willing to train others outside their organization and network, we wanted to help them give it away. Just like we talked about within MPL USA, which meant having that training budget available really did help them. Okay? So there are literally hundreds of L3s across India. But we've never had in our network, in the North India and Nepal, by no means are all of the things happening in our network for that matter, but we've never had more than, I've never seen more than 70 master trainers come out of the work. And by the way, the highest we ever got was 38 of those receiving any kind of personal support. Less than half. Why is that? Why, if we have budget, wouldn't we use it on those things? Remember this piece about outsourcing. We were gentle on the budget piece earlier, but every barrier is about who can and who can't. And by the time we're talking about pastor or plant or be sent again to the next empty field, you better believe that the way you use your budget will create your ceiling. Is that fair? So if you're going to pay pastors, you've immediately got a limit on how many churches you're going to see, don't you? You can be stuck to that pinwheel for a long time because this guy simply has run out of days of the week. And he's not going to release what he's paid to do. Daniel?
Can you speak to some of the money mistakes that you've seen made or that you've made personally so we can avoid those pitfalls?
Let's go with the latter.
I'll offer you one that's really valuable, and it happens all over India every day. Don't tie that budget to any kind of quota.
Good.
Don't tie your budgeting, especially salaries, to a quota. If you can baptize 20 by December, we'll give you a salary next year. Let me tell you, post-Thanksgiving, November, December are going to get really creative in your network. You with me? By you attaching the feeding of some guy's little kids to the uncontrollables of God giving life, you want to manipulate your disciples, there's plan A. You with me? Be really careful on the quota system. I tried to make a light of it, it's just not a laughing matter.
Yeah, that's right.
Other mistakes along the way, I haven't, thankfully I don't believe I've fallen into that trap, but we've seen it over and over. Other thoughts?
Nathan,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you say like you don't pay the pastors, but are you advising them not to get support from their churches?
Okay, great question. And I remember where I was going next. Yeah, one of the reasons we don't pay is that we actually want to see everything needed vested in every local church.
Right.
We actually want to get to that closed loop economy with no need to outsource.
Yeah.
And if we're willing to pay into that, they won't perceive the need, and therefore we've outsourced even finance. So we have seen, even where it's meager, and mind you, we've done a lot of micro business along the way. Entire networks, 20 at a time, new pastors and others being trained and stewarding a business, a family business plan.
Yeah.
That works really well with extended family, where it's the cousins and brothers. It's a family business inside the caste system, and we can actually help them become more efficient. We've had very little success introducing something they didn't have pre-existing experience with. But if we found out what their family was doing, we could help them grow that business. And so we've been able to maintain, the vast majority of pastors in the network have maintained bivocational status. By the way, the SBC, the largest Protestant denomination in the U.S. and certainly the Western Hemisphere, is still at 42% bivocational pastors. That's in the wealthiest country on earth, correct? 42% bivocational. Okay, including my dad. Nevertheless, bivocational was a big piece, okay? Helping them with family businesses along the way. You know, here's a piece that we learned. What do we have right here? This is, if we were going to describe this, and we called it a Pauline track and toward an SC, and maybe there's overlaps along the way. We can see principles in the journeys. But the fact is, this is the apostolic track. This is the sent one track, if you will. Constantly expecting and challenging. In fact, release is really the step forward at each level. What about pastor teachers? What to do about depth? Man, we can work this, and if all we do is work this, we probably should listen when people say you're a mile wide and an inch deep. Oh, it's getting personal now, right? What to do? You know what we realized? Somewhere about the time we were getting to a trainer who was willing to train others, he had less time available, but praise God, because of release, if you will, we're helping them discern and understand, diagnose, where we have a local master trainer. One thing we committed to when we started providing budget for them to go outside is that this group, we would circle back all the way back here if necessary and help them with a pastor-teacher training across their churches. It's almost as if the apostolic track had gone out and we were going to circle back with a pastor-teacher track for depth and help them go deep. You've heard of things called foundations or confessions, majoring on the ability to teach, how to, it was basically Old New Testament survey and intense practice of interpretation, how to interpret the Scripture. Over and over and over, we took the sword Bible study method from the very first discipleship lesson, and we fleshed it out a little bit more after all those reps to include all of the basic hermeneutical principles I learned from Danny Aiken on this campus. In a very simple format. Main point, what did it mean to the original audience, what does it mean to us today? Jared likes the term say, teach, do. And okay? Circling back in order to help with the depth, right? But now hear this. This character piece wasn't tied to the pastoral content and training that we circle back with, was it? No. The character piece was always tied to the discipleship chains that went along in a Paul-Timothy relationship. And for that matter, the life on life and community where there was actually healthy church happening all along. Don't get confused. They waited till 4th Gen to deal with any character or pastoral things. No, that's not the case at all. If you're assuming that, it's because you have way too much confidence in content. But we circle back for the sake of pastoral training. We call it Foundations, Confessions of Faith. We can do a commercial for that later. But how to handle the foundation, make sure that there was a pastor for a shepherd for every flock. It mattered to us. It mattered to Paul, it mattered to us. Nevertheless, one other piece to suggest here, how did we introduce that training budget and at times, less than half of the time, a salary for them to move around and be mobile and flexible? We actually introduced what we call an ABC triangle. Is that okay? It's not too much right at the end of the day? You doing okay?
Yeah. Got hours to go.
Okay. Not even dark? Stay out of the window, you know what happens. All right? See if I can do this right to keep it so we don't have to redraw it. What's the original relationship here? In our case, I'm going to use our acronym, right? It really was an IMBer connected to a master trainer, if you will. That disciple who, over a 3 to 4 year process, we had seen progress toward training. And what was our role when we dropped in, parachuted in? We parachuted in as a trainer, right? And a lot of our, cross-culturally, a lot of our integrity, and have you done all these things you're training people to do? In fact, they were backfilled as we modeled and trained in a training scenario. For some reason, my most effective evangelistic work cross-culturally has always been in a training situation, where we don't just train seat sewing, we go out 2 by 2. For some reason, that seems to be the evangelistic witness that God blesses in my work, in my life. So it wasn't learn to do all these things and then start training. Actually doing the training with integrity meant going out with them. The backfill was built in along the way. You see it? And as a commercial, don't assume, to be careful about this idea that I can't train until I've done it myself. Because there's some suggestion in there that the truth of Scripture needs you to prove it. Be careful. That truth has its own integrity.
Amen.
Now, do you have integrity? That's the question at stake, right? Are you willing to go back and practice those things? Don't assume be careful not to make your own ability to see fruit an idol. I've got to prove it before I can teach it. It's got its own integrity. With me? In the truth? Nevertheless, 3 to 4 years, we called this the A relationship. You know what it was about? It was about acceleration. It was about the apostolic track, if you will. Okay? Now, by the time we got over here to a commitment to a master trainer, you know what we saw? Honestly, to circle back and handle the balance pieces, we didn't always have the time to introduce all that content. To commit. We wanted to stay hot on the edge. But we had partners in the Great Commission community that could help us with balance, right? Help us with the depth. So we would introduce an SBC church partner for a B relationship. That's acceleration or apostolic track, if you will. B, relationship for balance. What was the balance? Old New Testament survey. Hermeneutics, 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 right? Confessions of faith. This pastoral training track that they could come along, provide man hours, and help us. There were times when Sugar Creek in Sugar Land, Texas has graduated more than 1,200 pastor teachers out of our network. That went from saved to shepherd. That's one example of many different churches that have been involved. A guy named Mike Christian from CF Miami has probably cost more than 2,000 that he graduated. 2 years. Used to be the attaché to the White House for the Coast Guard. He retired, he came, he was so squared away, we couldn't get him to change the sword method. It was beautiful. Let's do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. Wake up at 6, do your push-ups, some pull-ups. Now let's do the sword method, you know? It was beautiful. So balance was there. But you know what they told us along the way? Don't let us go. There's a lot of things that cross-culturally they didn't understand, couldn't grasp. They needed a C, if you will. The C relationship was the ask a lot of times for the sake of clarity, of communication. Because the cross-cultural setting needs to be clarified. Here's how we don't use money. Here's the basic principles of participative Bible study. Here's what they mean when they say, I was able to pray and that guy came back to life. Those kind of things. Helping them understand what they were seeing in the field. So coaching or clarity, communication. So ABC became a pretty effective piece. Now where did the budget come from? The B relationship helped us provide that training budget whereby this guy could go out and see this happen. So he had his own network of church planning. But now through that training budget, he's also able to go out in a level 4 role and help others multiply. And what is all of that? That's the critical path based on subsegments toward multiple streams and multiple generations, which has been referred to often as a church planting movement. All by God's grace and the power of the Spirit of God. Yeah.
So, so are you coaching the C relationship before they enter into the B relationship?
In some cases. But in most cases, it was just-in-time training. Didn't take long to model the foundations. If you could teach Sunday school in most cases, or VBS over a summer, you were ready to teach storying and the sword method, cross-culturally. But the coaching was as much about principles, right, and how to fast-track. In a lot of cases, the folks, the volunteers that would come out and help us with that, again, had they been doing these things along the way? Not necessarily. But we were helping them backfill as well. We actually helped a lot of these through this. We were actually invited in a lot of cases, in Sugar Creek's case, with the help of Jeff moving back and Ray Vaughn blowing their whole paradigm up, right? You know what happened out here? What's going on in Sugar Creek right now? Oh, and by the way, if this was Jared relating, guess what's over here? Other master trainers also in process. Because over here's a Loke, well that's Chunder. You know? So that it becomes pretty complex pretty quick. This kind of starfish decentralized, I love it, network blowing out every direction. Kyle.
Back to the money. So we wouldn't automatically, someone who's seen an L3 leader, we wouldn't automatically say, let's get this guy some cash.
Yeah.
We would see a need first.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
realistically, it would be, L4 would be ideal to start churning money to. Right?
Well, so if he's gotten all this way without,
Right.
remember, that was a key piece in help in preventing barriers along the way.
Right.
But it also means he doesn't have a lot of experience in that.
Uh-huh.
So the how and what of budget, we would do on a case-by-case basis for a
Right.
while it was just the A relationship.
Yeah,
Hey, go do this training, hey, go do that.
right.
Some of these pieces, like I said though, by the time we were committing to go back with pastoral training as network and introducing an SBC partner or another entity to help, like a single Mike Christian, that's where at that time he'd already done some of the reps on how to handle budget, how to keep a spreadsheet, that kind of thing, how to turn in receipts on a case by case before we ever gave a budget.
But
It was meant to protect him even from mistakes out of naivete. Is that the
Right.
word? Huh? Yeah, something like that.
Nathan, how do you keep from, when you start the funding, how do you keep from the leaders comparing, saying, hey, you're doing so well because you got this church now helping you, and I don't have my, and then you got these guys talking because they're not the same level of funding.
Okay, so remember that ideally our ideal here is, ideally our ideal.
It's easy for you to say.
Is that we're not funding any type of budget. We're doing some travel here, so there's some issues that come up pretty quick. But by the time we're actually helping them do ministry outside their network. So they're being introduced for the first time in most cases, or bringing training for the most time. They're seen as an outsider in most of these networks.
So not personal salary, you're funding their budget for travel and their
And training.
costs. Okay.
So in a lot of cases, the history of when, well, to use personal examples, I may not be the best thing. But if a brother's traveling towards South India to do training, they don't know all of his personal finance history and other things. So there's a buffer there outside his network. But you're right. I mean, those things are going to come up. Why? All along the way, they don't typically give away what they're paid to do. That's true here too.
Just one, I mean, I think, Kumar, a lot of you heard Kumar's testimony. You're sort of looking for things the guy's doing, and, so Kumar's selling businesses, selling cars, he's working a full-time job, doing that kind of stuff. So you're seeing, it's already happening. These are character and integrity. These are, what you shared this morning. It's this, wow, I just found something in this field that's worth everything I got. I'm willing to get rid of everything to go do this. Yeah. And so I think you start to see things like that. I think, if you translate it in the U.S. context, you start seeing people reorganizing their time, and all of a sudden they're not giving 6 hours a week, they're giving 10 hours a week, they're giving 15 hours a week. Right. And then maybe over here, when they're somewhere in here, you start, maybe you ought to think about doing this full time. But I think we always encourage people to be as much as possible doing it. But that's when you're talking about maybe you might start raising support. But you're starting to see some incredible sacrifices here where if you jump in too early and say, you know, you got this church planted, why don't you quit your job and go plant churches now? Well, he really has to me there's a role of, I don't know if suffering's the right word, perseverance would probably be the right word. There's a season of perseverance that they almost need, the L3 needs to have to go through, you know, and so you watch that, and even like, you know, recently I got to reconnect with Kumar after years and all the investment Nathan, these guys had in him, and you know, he was right back where he was at again. I mean, he's getting ready to sell his house, his cars, you know, because now he's over here now, and he's wanting to now reach the whole world, you know, and so, you know, he's selling stuff, you know, and you're just like, well, let me help you, brother, you know, because the conduit's there. When you start seeing this guy becomes, he's a pipe builder. He's laying pipe down, and the money flows, the training flows, he's giving the kingdom away. When you start seeing that kind of character integrity, you know that's the guy that.
So, by the way, it's Augie, isn't it? Thank you. I was about to say, when you went out to the sheriff's department in Booger Holler and said, where are the meth labs, and he circled 6 apartment complexes, nobody was paying you to do that, right?
Yeah, highest 911 calls, yeah.
Okay. Praise God, along the way, E3 gave you the tax exempt status, so if you wanted to raise your own funds. You
That's
know?
right, yeah.
That's right. That's kind of a carrot, I guess. Praise God. You see that? But it was multiplying before. What would you consider your job description this day? You're not doing what you do. You're not doing your personal disciplines for that.
No, my job description is to help people become problem solvers based on biblical principles. Right now would be some
So you're living
coaching
your life.
coaches.
You're
yeah.
living your life in here.
But I'm still doing my disciplines down here.
Well, can we just stop for a second and say everywhere around the room we see this? Can we say that?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I got one more thing before we're done.
Nathan, just to echo something that Beast Mode Tom said.
Beast Mode Tom, yeah, right.
So just to reiterate it, because I missed it for a while,
Okay.
was the temptation is to look at this and ask, where am I?
Yeah.
And you self-diagnose. But I think we found the best way to utilize this tool, because Jesus came to serve, not to be served, is where are the people that I'm serving at, and what do they need to be successful, to get through those barriers.
Right on. Right on. And to be sustained in every. And guys, again, what you're talking about, when we talk about diagnostics for church, we've shifted the metrics from a spreadsheet of how many baptisms and how many churches to tracking elements of function as health. Don't you love that about church circles? Hey, what are we tracking here? How many church planters have you raised up? No, wait a second. How many of those have wrestled with no longer a brawler in the 1 Timothy 3 list? Now we're breaking it down on character. Now we're breaking it down on vision. Now we're dealing to the B part of the metric by which things are sustainable. We're building men, if you will. You know, we're building leaders, not just spreadsheets. I like that. I'm going to try this one more time. I might get it right. Okay. So there was your expat, or if you will, your cross-cultural worker. There's your Paul going into Lystra, maybe, I don't know. There's your master trainer. And there's your, in our case, it was an SBC partner, right? So we called it A, B, and C. I've just taken this and brought it over here.
So Nathan, can you do it using names in the Bible? Like Paul, like you said, Paul, Timothy.
Yeah, I
you do
could,
that?
yeah, but it would break down pretty quick because the examples, I am going beyond. I don't want you to think I'm totally forcing Paul and Timothy.
US or?
Yeah, okay, as opposed to, I'll skip
US,
out on the biblical
national.
thing because there are examples, but it'll break down at some point, no doubt. So this is the cross-cultural worker. How's that?
Paul?
Missionary?
Paul.
Missionary, yeah. This is the pastor, teacher, trainer, you know, that balance piece. maybe you might say there's some analogy in I sowed, Apollos watered.
Apollo, okay.
Okay? Then this would have been the Corinthians, but who's there? I don't know. This then, the master trainer, I'll keep as master trainer, okay? Because that's our generic term. Now, this relationship continues, right? We're on the backside of the bell curve because Kumar knows far more than I do. But as we're committed to this relationship, it's been 3 to 4 years to get to this point. Now we're committing to some budget, which means what? We're going to commit another, typically 3 to 4 years of an MOU for a budget, or we're not going to do it. We're not doing 12 months and then we're out. No, we're going to, so look at that. By the time we got a triangle, we're committed to we're talking about what's called a decade now.
What's an MOU?
Oh, like a memorandum of understanding. Okay. Just so everybody knows who's who and what's what and the expectations.
Yeah.
Helps even cross-culturally, I promise. This continued by introducing the B relationship toward that balance piece. This continued. We were able to keep working through that network so that the edge could stay hot, right? So that generational growth could continue. Now, if this is too much, don't worry. You don't have to get this to get it. But what's the goal? We're working through that master trainer to do what? Oh, here's one way you could say it. Maybe this is the SC role, if you will, if that's the master trainer, right?
Okay.
And this is the pastor teacher. Okay?
That's usually national.
Yeah, typically it was cross-cultural to a Kumar, a Lupak, or whoever. But we're continuing to train and work through them to what? Toward what? They're moving from here to here, aren't they? In which case, over time, they're raising up other local master trainers. In that sense, they're becoming an SC. So on this side of the line, it's master trainer, but if you will, through them, other master trainers were emerging over these 3 to 4 years. So in a sense, they're becoming an SC. And as this brother works through them, or that church volunteer balance, what are they working toward them? We called it, just for the sake of one more acronym at the end of your long day, we called it a movement strengthening strategist. MSS.
It would be the B.
That B relationship whereby there was a mobile trainer who could get up and down, do pastoral training.
Okay.
Campaign, what's this guy campaigning?
Okay.
Death.
Yeah.
What's this guy campaigning?
Okay.
The apostolic edge.
And he decided to be
Now, if these two guys don't get along, you'll end up with a faction. Well, I'm sowing the seed, and I'm watering the seed, and wait a second. So these two guys are, if you will, they're that. So in a sense, he's the balance function. He's the acceleration or apostolic function, and if they don't relate to each other, maybe he's carrying the clarity function. Make sure they don't kill each other. Now, in a sense, then, this is a master trainer network, if you will. What do we got over here on this side of the graph? We've got an SC team. We've got, we've got local ownership of the core missionary task. That's what we got. And if we can get this to a place where it's autonomous on its budget, we introduce some things over here, you better believe you got to wean off. You got to deal with business and other things so that this training is sustainable inside. You got to quit outsourcing the budget, even what you introduce for their training. You got to push it back in. In which case, we started a wing called Business Initiators out of Delhi. Not just helping church planners or networks with family business plans, but also helping master trainers with much larger scale businesses by which they could be self-supported. Because if everything could, this SC, and again, what is it? Our goal was local ownership of the core missionary task for every people group in place.
Yeah.
And we've got to be willing to give it away. And all along, support or dependence is much more than just a finance, but, right? Authority, deference to a teacher, a personality, success, all of that, but don't forget it also does include finance. And whatever you introduce, you got to have a plan to get out, to exit that as well. so that it could be sustainable and sourced in a network at least.
So it would be investment in the business part from the outside.
There's a time when, if you're introducing budget back here, there's a time when you need to be thinking exit before you ever sign that first MOU. But for 3 to 4 years. Part of the MOU in some cases where that partner was willing to invest some budget, even then, we were talking with them about the business that could happen here. And so, I'm not gonna give specific examples because it's not your business, and you know a lot of those trainers. We've developed businesses before we released, as best we could. You hearing me, Daniel?
They did
You tried.
an idea. And they said we can multiply
Yeah.
in every tribe, like
So
the same
the
thing. But I don't know how
movement
to
trainer
get the money
that becomes
to
strategy
start
coordinator
first
here in the
one to
middle.
multiply.
Is his
I didn't
primary
know
role within that
how
B
it helped them.
relationship to
They
just
like, I don't know how
open
much,
up
but
access
they
to
already
his network
plan
for the
business.
Yeah.
for the training to take
And in a
place?
sense, he takes on this clarity function to make sure these guys understand and respect. He's stewarding the balance of breadth and depth. He's ensuring that they circle back and get the pastoral training. He's making sure that if seats always hot, you know, God's, the church formation matter is counterbalance, that kind of thing.
Would you do the same format in a US context, or that you would?
Honestly, I'm kind of hiding and watching, and every time I come back, see how y'all are doing with it. But if there's some principles that carry over, then by all means have them. We've learned lessons. I don't know that it would be the same, and I don't know that that budget piece would even be scalable. So it might be very different on this side. But honestly, I hope you guys figure it out, because we'd like to
I think
see how that
it's,
works.
what we're starting to see, Jeff, you can speak to this, is the church is now training and sending out the worker, finding the national partner over there. So it's actually being mobilized out of the church.
Yeah, right on. Right on. In a sense, this one, right?
Yes.
In a sense,
That's
that
becoming a
the Ray
pipeline.
Vaughn of the whole model was, and Don Waverat's vision, was really the trump card we didn't anticipate. Because while we were over here doing that, they're like, this is cool, where does this happen? Hey, we gotta, did you meet Don, or we did first, I don't know which, but by the time they met Ray Vaughn, it was on, you know?
So imagine, if you're just using your illustration, imagine 47,000 churches
Woken up to that?
sending
Oh, yeah.
those
Now,
missionaries that know how
I agree.
to partner that will mobilize that over there.
And so, beautiful, the potential is limitless. That said, the potential for usurping and trying to shortcut this initial process, that A relationship is also
Or,
limitless.
let me throw it the other way around though, because again, that's pretty American-centric as far as the way we're thinking.
Oh, yeah.
There's 593 movements, and most of them in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And I think if there's 593, it's probably closer to 1,000. I mean, because I know this guy's not reporting some stuff, anyhow, but either way, if you got 593 movements, let's just say, how many of these guys are in there?
Yeah.
How many of these guys are in there? And just think of the horsepower that's laying right there. If they figure out how to do this, more so, the more and more they can do it on their own, the more power there is within that. So now hook that with 46,000 churches and this piece here, and essentially, Jesus is coming. I hear the trumpet. So,
Hey, and think on it now, E3, we're on the backside of a bell curve, partly for a guy like Kumar. You know why? Because I'm tied to that 1.7 billion in South Asia. E3's not necessarily tied, so they can take that guy to Uganda and put him in this role by a great, where are you, brother, who invited and used him in that sense? Thank you. And you enabled him, you platformed him on another continent to do that work.
Wow.
So in a sense, it's him dropping into this role in a whole other continent. Right? That's what you're saying, that force multiplier. That, man, by the time Asians and Chinese and others are training on the U.S. side, just keep them away from Cracker Barrel.
Jeff, that church isn't just America. We're talking churches that are planted all over. If we have churches that are multiplying over, that start to because you started with the SC. Where did the SC come from? Well, now if we got churches that are mobilizing SCTs, that are actual doers.
Oh, yeah. All kinds of streams would go off down this way as well. There'd be triangles all over the world from every, and you end up with this kind of butterfly network or whatever, starfish kind of network by which, who exactly is leading that MPL thing? Yeah, right. Exactly, Jesus. Good luck. Good luck figuring him out. And if you figure out who it is, you blame him for all of those concerns. What do you say, guys? Is that enough for today?